Shirley, thank you very much for being here with me today.
It's a real pleasure. I would obviously prefer to be with you in person and in beautiful Valemount, but that's not going to happen for a little while. So very grateful to have the technology, and thank the village office for sharing it with us today.
Yes, I certainly will do that. Let's take a look at some of the statistics that are out there. As of yesterday, the Canadian statistics, right now we have over 36,000 cases in Canada, 1,690 deaths. And then in BC itself, we have 1,699 cases as of yesterday, 39 now here in our northern region, of which 9 of them are active and 30 fortunately have recovered. 86 deaths total in the province, 104 hospitalizations, 49 of those in ICU, and 1,039 have recovered. So we're doing better, I think. They say that our curve is flattened. In fact, I think it's bending downwards now in large measure to BC's efforts at physical distancing. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, first of all, this has been a very challenging time for people, our region, our province, and our country. And I think that what's most important right now is that we follow the advice of medical professionals who are making the decisions about what it takes to flatten the curve, what we need to do as we think about the transition moving forward. And it's really tough. People have been in their homes, they've been missing loved ones and the connections we make in community. And that's going to apparently continue for some time. So I have taken the position that, my perspective, I'm not a medical health professional. I love where I live, I love to represent this region of the province, but I think we're making progress because people are listening and doing what is expected of them. And it's a tough thing to do, I understand that, but I think it is making a difference.
Absolutely, but of course it's come at quite a cost, both in the amount of illnesses and deaths, as well as really a kind of a knee-buckling blow to BC's economy right now. Before the pandemic, and I'm sure you know this statistic, BC's GDP growth was estimated to be 2% this year. Now the BC Business Council is warning that the GDP in BC could shrink by 7 to 12% and overwhelm the government's $5 billion action plan that they've put in place. We'll get back to the economics in a moment because that's important to people as well. Also, the weather's warming up now, which, thankfully, living in a cold climate, you want it to warm up. However, in this case, it's kind of making people even more anxious to get out into the backcountry and into the parks, etc., to get back to their normal activities again. Also, to get back to work again. People are really chomping at the bit. So I would kind of say it's a watershed moment for us here right now, Shirley. It's beginning to feel like we're getting ahead of the virus a little bit, but if we ease up too fast on the restrictions, we could see those numbers start to spike upwards again. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think you've summarized it very well, and I think that every day we hear from Dr. Bonnie Henry, and she reminds us that we are in the eye of the storm, that there is the possibility of ongoing community transmission. I think British Columbians have done a really great job. It's hard to stay out of community and to stay home as much as possible. But I think that right now we need to hold the line, as Dr. Henry describes it, and that's not easy. We have long winters and we're all anxious to get outside. But I want to assure residents that the government is doing what it needs to do now, which is focus on the public health crisis and start thinking about that transition. How do we move out of the phase we're in now to the second phase? We're not going back where we were just months ago, and we're not going to be seeing a light at the cliff. It's going to take time to transition. And, I think people have to find new ways of being outside. Dr. Henry has said repeatedly, of course you can go outside. It's how you do that matters, and how we do business will look differently for a while. So I take comfort and hope from her remarks that say, this is for now. We need to work our way through it. But, there will be a new normal. I think all of us have to recognize that. And I think we're all in different phases of adjusting to that.
Yeah, absolutely. People are making great sacrifices. They're suffering, they're out of work, they're out of school, they're isolating themselves. Businesses are suffering, both small businesses and large businesses, of course. Some of them, unfortunately, may never reopen as a result of what's happening here. It's something we've never seen, and it happened so incredibly fast that, you know, nobody could have been prepared for how quickly this moved. But I think that the Canadian government, as well as the government of BC, they've acted quickly on this. For anybody who knows, as you do, how the governments usually work and how the speed of things usually happen, this has been incredibly fast, you have to admit that. So let's talk about, if we can, what I want to do is, because you're quite a good source of information, you may not have all the answers, I understand that, a lot of these questions may be federal for you, but I want to talk about what's out there for people, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you today was to try to sort of put all of the programs and information into one source here so that people don't have to keep searching for it all the time, and maybe we can get through a lot of these. So I'm going to break it down by the research that I've done on the Canadian programs, and please jump in any time here to correct me or to add to that if you can, and then we'll move on to the BC programs as well, if that's okay. So in terms of of Canada and Canada's response, before we get into the programs, I wanted to know, what do you think of Prime Minister Trudeau and the Federal Liberal Party and how they've been handling this crisis so far?
Well, I think one of the things that I've really tried to do and really have actually learned some things about, you know, now from perspective, now's not the time to be, you know, approaching this from a political perspective. This is about how together we work across party lines to serve Colombians and Canadians well. And, you know, I think that people who've been watching my response would understand that, you know, I have taken the opportunity to thank Minister Adrian Dix, British Columbia, for example, for his relentless efforts on these files. You know, have been a cabinet minister for a very long time. I can only imagine the challenges that ministers are facing. And one thing I do know is that no matter what level of government you work at, we have an incredible public service. In British Columbia, I've had the privilege of working with many of the same people that are now advising ministers in this government. And I know that their number one priority is caring for British Columbians, caring for Canadians. So, you know, I think, you know, we need to set aside some of those partisan politics at these times. The time will come for opposition members in particular to hold the government to account. There's going to be lots of economic challenges facing our region, our province, and our job is to ask those tough questions. But for right now, this is a public health emergency. And I have to say that I think, you know, all levels of government have been working very hard. I should also speak about the locally elected officials, and perhaps, you know, residents may know that I convene a weekly call with the elected officials along my highway corridors in my ride. So regional district representatives, mayors, some of the key staff in those communities. We talk once a week, and we share concerns, ideas, support one another to make sure we're serving our region together. So, you know, from my perspective, I'm sure people want to criticize. I think first, we should deal with the medical health issues, try to be constructive in our comments. The time for being critical and taking on a more typical opposition will come. But right now, I'm going to concentrate on serving my constituents by working constructively across the party line.
Great. Well, that's good to hear. Let's move on to some of the programs. So some of the federal programs that I've been able to source, firstly is the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, or the CERB, which provides $2,000 every 4 weeks for up to 16 weeks for now. I'm not sure if that'll be extended, but I'm sure this is the kind of the go-to program for a lot of people whose work has been jeopardized or terminated in the short term. The temporary salary top-up for low-income essential workers. So the Canadian government has indicated that those earning less than $2,500 a month on a full-time basis are getting a top-up on that. I'm not sure of the exact details of that, but that's great to know, because we have a lot of people who have become everyday heroes, those people working in the grocery stores and in the gas stations who are essential to our survival, and now they're going to start to be getting a little bit more on there. The Canada Child Benefit has been increased by an additional $300 per child. There's a special GST payment that's already gone out, $400 for individuals, $600 for couples. They've allowed extra time for people to file their 2019 tax returns. The deadline's been extended to June the 1st. Student loans, for those that are on student loans, the Government of Canada, and we'll talk about BC in a minute, student loans have been frozen for 6 months with no interest. That's going to be a big help for a lot of people. They've put a lot of money into other types of programs as well. For example, improved access to essential food services, food support services. $100 million have gone to national, regional, and local organizations to help with distributing food to people that need it. Supporting people experiencing homelessness, $157.5 million has been put aside to that file. Supporting women and children fleeing violence, which of course you know, and our viewers are aware that everybody being cooped up in the same house now is a dangerous situation, especially for those who are experiencing domestic violence, and so they've got some additional help for that as well. Youth mental health support and additional adult mental health support, but $7.5 million has been put aside to the Kids Helpline to help children who are struggling with this, youth that are struggling with this. Seniors have been given $9.9 million to the United Way in order to help seniors, and they've also expanded the New Horizons program to allow for immediate use of funding. I've been involved with the seniors organization, and I know that it's a bit of a hoop jumping to get through the New Horizons funding usually, so this will be a big help for people. And then for individuals, mortgage deferrals from what they call the big 6 banks, up to 6 months have been permitted to be deferred on mortgage payments for that, which is going to be another big help for people. Anything on any of those you want to throw in before I get into the business side?
No, but what I do want to let people know is that, first of all, you've done an excellent job summarizing the programs. And it literally is important to check pretty much every day. As you can imagine, when a government is moving quickly to try to get resources and support family businesses, there are going to be gaps. And what I've been pleased about is when gaps have been identified, government is working to close those gaps. You know, the first announcement wasn't perfect. We saw, particularly seasonal workers and part-time workers. I'm still concerned about students who work in the summer. The Prime Minister has made a commitment to look at additional programs to support those students. Because if you imagine, they're very concerned about how they're going to earn tuition dollars if they can't get a job. So we've seen some initiatives related to student summer program, for example, where businesses can get 100% support for hiring summer students. So I'm going to continue to monitor what is announced on the student front. But the most important thing, and when people are worried, as you outlined so well, they're worried about feeding their families, keeping businesses open, trying to make those payments every month. We need to help them quickly. There are going to be gaps. And I think the government is working to close those gaps every day. Every morning when I listen to the Prime Minister, I make notes as well to try to sort out what has changed in the last 24 hours. So I want to remind people, and people have been very good. I try to monitor the Facebook sites from the Mount Robson region throughout the Robson Valley region, to try to respond to people. It sometimes takes me some time to navigate, but there are some supports. Canada.ca is a great place to go, and if you simply explore, there's question and answers there. There are now navigators that help with small businesses. So I think it's a matter of us working together to support people as they're trying to find the appropriate level of resource. And we also have to raise issues. You know, one of the biggest issues for me was related to very small businesses. We all know that McBride, Valemount, and Prince George have some very small businesses. And in fact, when we're looking at the forgivable loan threshold, it was a payroll level of $50,000. It eliminated a large number of small businesses. So that issue was raised at the federal government level, and that threshold has now been dropped to $20,000, helping some of those small businesses take advantage of an interest-free loan. So it's important to share concerns, find a way to navigate, and that's what your elected officials are here to do. And I've certainly spent the last number of weeks trying to be a pathway to solutions, and I will continue to do that.
Well, great segue on business, because I want to talk about Canada's programs for businesses now. As you say, they are evolving. I found some new updates even 2 days ago on this file. But let's go through some of the programs that are out there so people understand what is available. So first of all, the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, which covers 75% of employees' wages. This is huge because it allows employers to keep employees working even on a limited basis with this kind of help for it. So.
And Michael, maybe I'll just jump in there to say this. That was a really good example of where feedback to the federal government, which was swift, resulted in that change to 75%. Because as you would recall, the initial announcement was a much lower percentage. And businesses were completely concerned about that. So again, you know, the efforts were not what's most helpful to business. Government responded and increased it to 75%. And I think that is something that will help us keep workers working. In fact, we've seen some larger organizations bring workers back to work that they had laid off because that was increased to 75%. So I have to give the government credit for responding and adjusting that percentage.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a significant amount. There's also for employers a temporary 10% wage subsidy, which is a 3-month program, I understand, that allows employers to reduce the amount of payroll deduction remittances to the Canada Revenue Agency, which is a large cost for a lot of businesses, so that'll be a help. These are not in any particular order, by the way. I'm just going to go through them. There's a business credit availability program, which of course you referred to a little bit ago, which are loan guarantees. These are more for medium to larger sized businesses. And then the Canada Emergency Business Account, which is exactly what you were talking about, interest-free loans up to $40,000, which I understand are starting to move pretty quickly now that they finally got the details ironed out for that. Something that is on the near horizon, and even the government website says it's coming very soon, is Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance. So as we know, rent is one of the largest expenses for any kind of business, small or large. These are loans, or they could be forgivable loans, made specifically to property owners to allow them to forego rent or to lower rent to small businesses, tenants. This is going to be a huge thing, and I know a lot of people are suffering, and even here in Valemount, people are wondering if there's any support coming. There is. It just has not been fully announced yet.
I should say that when I think about the standing concerns that remain for many people, obviously student summer employment is an issue, but commercial is one of the biggest issues. And British Columbia has provided supplemental assistance for residential properties where landlords are going to receive some assistance. But one of the biggest issues that I consider to be outstanding at this point, at least, and who knows, it may change tomorrow, as you said, help is on the way, we have been told. But commercial rental for properties has been a continued issue that's been raised with me. Again, the federal government is aware of that. The provincial government is aware of it, and we can be hopeful that in the not too distant future we'll see some relief there.
Right. Here's another program that I wasn't familiar with, but it's called Rural Businesses and Communities Program. $287 million are provided to Community Futures to provide rural businesses and communities with much needed access to capital. And I know that's another big thing for people. They can't do anything with their businesses because they can't get the capital because of their loss of revenue right now. So that's another important program. The GST remittances have have been deferred until June the 30th. More time without interest or penalties to pay the income taxes. What more have you thought about that could be done at the federal level that isn't being done that you might suggest?
Well, I certainly think that the issue related to rent, and I was very pleased to see special emphasis on rural development and rural issues. That was just a recent announcement within the last couple of days. We're very pleased to see a focused community futures. We have the regional community futures approach here in northern BC. And again, it's an opportunity for small businesses in particular to be connected to community futures and to have some of those important supports. So I think from my perspective, we need to continue to look at the commercial rent issue. And the biggest issue people are talking about is liquidity. Getting cash to those businesses quickly, making sure that they have the kinds of support they need to continue to exist. I am deeply concerned about the future of these small businesses. I know of specific examples in Prince George where we have seen the closure of businesses, where people have said, we can't continue, no matter what supports are available, we're done. And that is a deep concern for us, and we're going to have to monitor and continue to find support. So I think we will, as you use the best word, this is evolving, changes every day, and people need to stay focused on what are the issues, what are the gaps, sending that information forward. And my job is, along with our MP and others, Mayor and others, is to take that information and share it with the appropriate lookout.
Right. Well, you've certainly done a great job of sharing it with the people via Facebook and Twitter and other things, and I'm sure everybody's very appreciative of that. Let's move on to, if we can now, BC programs and what's out there in terms of BC. So first of all, it's the BC Hydro COVID Relief Fund I want to talk about. These, again, are in no particular order. And so this is for people who aren't aware. It's for residentials. There's two parts, residentials and small businesses. For residential customers where you or your spouse or partner have stopped working due to COVID-19 may be eligible to receive 3 months of credit on their BC Hydro bill. The credit amount is based on the average consumption that they use, and it's not a loan. They won't have to pay this back. So that's going to be a big help for people, I think, as well. They will need to do this for both the residential customers and small businesses. They have to apply. They need to be approved for it, and if they're approved, the credit's automatically added back to their account. For small businesses who use a lot of electricity that needed to close on account of COVID-19 measures, they may be eligible to have their business's electricity usage charges waived for up to 3 months as well. So those are a couple of good programs. I have a question from a viewer. I'm not going to put it in this section, but it is about BC Hydro, and we'll come back to that.
Sure, and maybe I'll just speak, and this might be the question I would be anticipating. Another issue related to BC Hydro is obviously Tier 2 pricing. And, when we look at the two levels of pricing and there are no other energy alternatives for people, that is an enormous issue. So I want, constituents to know that I've raised that issue with the provincial government, that, now might be a time to look at how we provide some relief on that second tier pricing through hydro. So I have raised that issue. The government said previously that they were going to look at this issue anyway. So I have encouraged them to look at it more expeditiously, and we'll see if there's any response on that.
Well, that was, in fact, the question, a quite strongly worded question. Would you ask Shirley why the government has not been put pressure on to get rid of this Tier 2, at least while the pandemic is on, at least. I'm sure most people would want to get rid of it completely, but this is a good opportunity to save people a lot of money because a lot of people, this is their highest household expense is the electricity. It's a simple and efficient way, as the question was, to reduce the financial burden on BC ratepayers. So.
Well, and I think it's a very legitimate question, and I took some pretty strong criticism about this when I was obviously in government, but I have always been supportive of looking at how we provide some equity there for people in our part of the province. So I understand that that's an important question, and I want to assure the person who asked the question that I have raised this issue. And we'll continue to monitor whether or not government will take a look at this. I think you're absolutely right. It would be a natural time to provide some relief for families. Cost of that tier 2 pricing is prohibitive for families. I would like to see a permanent fix. And so once we move beyond dealing with the COVID issues, it is an issue that needs to stick on my to-do list. So I can assure the viewer that question has been raised, and I'll be continuing to look for an answer.
Absolutely. Well, of course, with people being staying home to do their part, everyone's using a lot more electricity now, so yeah, it's become an even bigger question for that. Where was I on these questions here? So the BC emergency benefit for workers, this is the one-time $1,000 payment to people whose ability to work has been affected by COVID-19. Have those checks gone out yet, do you know? Are they?
No, and in fact, that's an interesting thing. The application process has not even, the actual formal registration for it, at my last check, had not actually opened yet. So people need to stay to the government, the provincial government website, gov.bc, and we'll line up people who are receiving the CERB benefit of $2,000. This is a one-time benefit from Columbia, but the last time I registered hadn't started. So again, there's a place where I think we hope that will happen.
Right. And then, of course, there's the climate action tax credit. This is going to be happening in July for people. So this is a one-time enhancement to the BC Climate Action Tax Credit. Adults will get $218, up from $43.50, and children will be getting $64, up from $12.75. So another little boost there. And this is what you were talking about earlier, the support for renters and homeowners, up to $500 a month towards rent paid directly to the landlords. Evictions have been halted, rent increases have been frozen for that. So there's some relief there, and hopefully we can keep that going for as long as we need to.
I think it's important, Mike, to note that many families are struggling, and there's no doubt about that. And we need to be providing support. But as the government continues to remind people, if you can pay your rent, you should. Landlords are being provided with a $500 portion of that rent. So it's important that as we look to the future, that where we are able to maintain our payments, the government is reminding us to try to do that for the sake of landlords as well. So there have been some issues presented to me on behalf of landlords as well. When you have challenging tenants and are they going to receive their full rent payment as well? So it is about balance there, trying to support people, obviously making sure they have a place to live and continue to try to make their payments. But it's also about recognizing the challenges that landlords are facing too. So, government is reminding people, if you can pay your rent, you should.
Yeah, I'm sure most people are working within the system. There's always going to be a few who try to work around things, but if we can cut some of the other costs, the other expenses, that gives people a little bit more income to put towards rent. ICBC, those customers that are on a monthly payment plan may defer their payments for up to 90 days with no penalties. BC student loan payments, we talked about the Canada student loans. BC student loans have matched that, and so those loan payments have been frozen for 6 months with no interests. Then in terms of taxes, provincial taxes, deferred tax payments for businesses, delayed PST budget changes, delayed carbon tax increase, and reduced school taxes for businesses. I asked you what you thought could be done on the federal level. What do you think could be done in addition to these measures on a provincial level?
Well, again, I think we need to really focus on small businesses in British Columbia. We are seeing survey after survey tell us that we need to provide support because businesses, very high percentages of businesses are worried about their existence post-COVID. So I think that one of the things that we help from the provincial perspective is continuing to clarify how businesses can operate during COVID, making sure that we know the businesses that are essential, making sure that we know what kind of restrictions can be in place, but a business can continue to operate. There's still a lot of confusion about that. So I think we need to really put our thinking caps on and start thinking about what are the additional supports for businesses. So I'm very, I was happy to see that the Premier put together an economic advisory panel, and I'm pleased to see that. It's really important to bring leaders from across the province together to start to talk about what specifically we need to do. Look at some of the really varied sectors that have been absolutely devastated. Restaurant, hospitality, tourism. You start thinking of all the jobs that are associated with those industries. So very pleased to see that work be done on that, and I've been positive about that. My challenge is that there's not a lot of Northern representation on that panel. So I am hopeful that there will be mechanisms for us to feed up to that panel ideas and advice from Northern British Columbia. There is a First Nations representative who is from the North, but for example, they have the Surrey Board of Trade, the Vancouver Board of Trade, but they don't have the PG Chamber of Commerce, for example, or representatives from rural and remote communities. So to me, that's something I think hopeful the government will pay attention to. The fact of the matter is we're going to see businesses that will not exist post-COVID. And I think, Michael, when I reflect on what needs to be done, cash flow is the issue for many of these small businesses right now. So we need to be thinking about liquidity, cash flow, getting funds out to businesses as quickly as possible, and closing gaps when small businesses identify them for us.
Right. So in addition to Community Futures, we're fortunate enough to be at the northern end of the Columbia Basin Trust here. Columbia Basin Trust has opened up some programs as well for businesses and for, mostly for businesses as well. But do you feel there needs to be more emphasis put on business at this point?
Well, I think the approach we need to take is a phased approach. Right now, we're dealing with a public health emergency. We need to, rightly so, government is focusing on that. The next phase is about the economic recovery. And that work is beginning, and it should. We need to remember that coming out of COVID, we're going to have a lot of work to do. Rebuilding the economy, not just in British Columbia, but Canada. Going to need to deal with job creation programs. How do we deal with the loss of income that people are facing? So we're working toward that second phase now, in my view. We need, rightly so, we focused on the public health emergency. Now we need to start looking at what do we do to support businesses? How do we re-engage, reboot the economy? One of the things that I've said to my elected officials that I work with is, when you look at a recession or challenges that we faced in our country, typically coming out of those circumstances, we see infrastructure programs.
Right.
I think many people in the Robson Valley region and Prince George would remember the phrase shovel ready. And, when we came out of 2008, 2009, there were literally unending investments in infrastructure. So, again, on our weekly call, we talk about what are the projects that we could bring forward when the government calls, both federal and provincial, for infrastructure projects, for super, water. What are those things we need in our communities, but will also help employ people? So I think now is the stage we start to look at the incredible gap we're going to have in our economy. As you rightly pointed out, our GDP is going to drop. There's going to be unemployment levels that we haven't seen for a long time. So that work needs to be done now. People need to be thinking ahead. What are we going to do? How do we invest? And how do we encourage small business owners? And not being critical. I want to be clear about that. It is right to focus on public health. But we need now begin to look at what does it take to reboot the economy.
Right. It's going to be a massive undertaking for sure. I want to change gears for a minute, if I can, and we've got a bunch of public questions, as I mentioned, but I wanted to ask you about the BC 211 service, because I know that you've been involved with this. For those who aren't familiar with it, it's a service that matches seniors with volunteers. You were part of an all-party seniors working group that recommended that BC 211 be expanded throughout the province and that emergency funds be allocated to the program. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think people would be interested to know about this program.
Yes, I was very pleased. Minister Adrian Dix brought together members of all parties, including the Green Party, to work with the Seniors Advocate for British Columbia. And I was very pleased to be part of that working group. And I've been advocating to see the expansion of the VC 211 line for a long time, because we have not actually been able to dial 211 and get an answer. It didn't serve this part of British Columbia. So in many ways, one of the, I hope, legacies of the pandemic, and I hope we can talk a little bit about, what are some of the things that will benefit British Columbians at the end of the pandemic as well. There's lots of things that are going to be challenges, but I hope there's some positive things that come out of this as well. Hopefully, for me, a permanent 211 thing will be one of those legacy items. So if you're a senior at home and you have needs in British Columbia, even as something as important as a friendly phone call, if you're feeling isolated or alone, you can call 211 and register. And there is a checklist of the kinds of services that you would like to receive, whether it's having your prescription delivered or a friendly phone call. So there is an avenue for seniors, but there's also an avenue for volunteers. You can call, register as a volunteer. If you do not have your vulnerable seniors criminal record check, BC 211 will help you get that taken care of. So it's really a way to have certified volunteers, if you want to use that phrase, match with seniors in our communities. And I want to express a great deal of gratitude to the Seniors Advocate. She's been, Isabel McKenzie, a pleasure to work with. She's been very understanding when I've raised issues related to rural and remote communities. We're not like downtown Vancouver. We have to think differently. So I'm very pleased to see that work move forward, and I hope it will be one of the positive things that remains in place after the pandemic is after we've dealt with that.
Great. Well, we're going to come back to that question of legacy afterwards, because I think it's an important one. Last question on the provincial side. I see that the federal government is starting to meet again. Have you heard when BC Ledge might be gearing up to get back in sessions again in some form or another, whether it's virtual or, small attendance in person?
So I am certain that those discussions are taking place, but I should point out to people who may not be aware of it. Committee work, for example, I chair the Public Accounts Committee. It's the only committee that's chaired by a member of the opposition. It deals with the reports of the Auditor General. We continue our work today as if we were meeting in person. So we use technology. We have had 2 meetings with, again, they're all party meetings. So that work continues. In terms of the sitting of the legislature, obviously, anything that those will be very carefully thought out discussions with the leaders, the House leaders of the parties. But the major consideration is that we have a restriction on more than 50 people being in one place. So that obviously has parameters for the legislature. So I don't want people to be under the impression that work doesn't continue. And, I received quite a critical call the other day suggesting that, why wasn't I working? And I want you to know that I work 7 days a week. I deal with constituency emails, whether I'm at home or in my office. Whether the legislature is sick or not, it does not mean that we are not working. So It's a really good question. I know that there's been a lot of debate at the federal level about bringing Parliament together. So we have no definitive answers to whether or not there would be an in-person sitting, obviously not with the restrictions in place. And those are discussions that are held by the House leaders of all of the parties.
Sure, absolutely. But as an opposition MLA, do you feel that you're able to, and I don't want to put this in the wrong way because I know you don't want to be critical, but are you having an opportunity to provide feedback and to hold the government accountable to their actions during this time?
Well, I certainly think there has been a far more constructive relationship when it comes to the issue of the public health side of this. You know, Dr. Bonnie Henry has a great deal of experience. You know, she dealt with Ebola and SARS and all of those things. So, you know, it's really not a place that I'm going to be overly critical. I think that in the days and weeks ahead, we will need to have a more open process for holding the government to account when it comes to, you know, as you pointed out, you did a great job of outlining all of the programs. They all come with a cost. And, you know, in British Columbia's case, the initial package that was announced was $5 billion. So we know that that means that obviously, you know, a balanced budget is up for question. And I do think there is a role for transparency about how that funding is being spent. So I can say personally that, you know, government has opened avenues for me as an opposition MLA to ask questions. For example, like Tier 2 hydro, I have a way of sending those questions into government. Responses, as you can imagine, everyone is swamped with work. So I'd like to see those be a little more timely. But in the days that we've had, we will have to find ways and to have discussion, particularly on the economic side, and to do our job as an opposition in a more traditional way. That time hasn't arrived yet. Work is underway. Obviously, I am setting up questions, raising issues whenever and wherever possible.
Okay, great. Let's move on to the public questions that we've received. So the first one is, what is the government going to do to help the logging truck drivers that have just one truck and do not meet the criteria to get any subsidies from the government and has not worked since COVID-19 started in March? And then kind of a sub-question to that is, there are a lot of small businesses, owner-operators that do not have a payroll of $20,000 even. So you said that the original program was for payrolls of $50,000, then it was reduced to $20,000. What's happening with those people who fall under those limits? And the question about truck drivers as well.
Well, I think it's a really great question, and I will make note of it and try to do some follow-up work about that specific situation. But as I described earlier, I think programs continue to evolve. And as groups are identified that haven't been covered through the programs that have been announced, governments are trying to find ways to respond to that. So, you know, we've seen top-ups for seasonal workers and low-wage top-ups and a variety of other mechanisms. So I appreciate the question. I don't have a specific answer, unfortunately. But what I would encourage that person to do is to look through the myriad of programs that are available, find ways to take advantage of deferrals, of all of those kinds of payment programs. But I appreciate the question. I'll make a note of it, and I will continue to raise it as we raise issues about the forest industry in general. Okay,
great. Another question is, what does this one's I would say this is a process question. Somebody's having some difficulty with the process, so maybe you can help with this and maybe not. What does the government plan to do for people who applied for regular EI as they do not qualify for CERB, but were automatically put on the CERB benefit and received those payments instead of the proper EI payments they should have received? For example, the person is laid off, applied for EI, then was called back to work reduced hours. EI was approved, but they were transferred to the CERB instead, so now they're reluctant to use that CERB money, but are not getting any EI to fill the hours. So it's kind of a bit of a carousel there.
Well, I've heard a number of questions like this, and people are grappling with how on earth do I sort out all of the pathways. So, and I don't mean this in a flippant way at all. Those are exactly the kinds of cases that the constituents should call the MP's office, our MP Bob Zimmer. They have people that are working through specific cases, just as I am at the provincial level. That's exactly what our offices are there for. So, I would strongly encourage this person to call, and I'm also very thankful that we're being cautious about spending money that suddenly appears in their bank account until they sort out those details. The worst thing you'd want is a callback of some sort at a time when things are really difficult. So I just want to reassure the person they're not alone in struggling to figure out which, e-max or whatever these various avenues. But, I spend a lot of time every day working on specific case files, and I'm sure Bob and his office are doing the same thing. So I really strongly urge them to call the MP's office, and they're also welcome to send me an email, which I'm happy to share as well.
Right, because these two programs are both federal programs, so that's the appropriate avenue for it. They did say to me, not in the question, that they're having trouble getting answers because the phone lines are so busy and it's very difficult to get that information. But for federal programs, Bob Zimmer is the MP for this region and could probably help put that along. So here's another question, and I'll just read it verbatim. I have a question which I think is on a lot of local residents' minds at the moment, and that is the recent infiltration of workers that have been sent to Valemount to build the pipeline. My question is, why have hundreds of workers who have been carrying the COVID-19 virus been sent to a small local community that is currently virus-free? Why would our MLA put us at such risk? Why is the sudden expedited pipeline build more important than our local community's health and safety? And finally, how are we to stay motivated to remain in lockdown while the Prime Minister allows hundreds of workers to go out on location to work?
Well, first of all, I appreciate the honesty and the forthrightness of the question. First of all, as an MLA, I don't have the option of putting anyone at risk or not. That's not my role, and my job is to advocate for the communities that I represent. Companies that bring workers into other communities have restrictions that you need to follow. They simply can't operate business as usual. And of course people are going to be concerned and skeptical, but let's face it, we have mayors of McBride and Valemount, tourists, don't come here, please. We love to have you. We love to show off our region, just not now. So there's been lots of questions asked of Dr. Bonnie Henry about construction work in general. How do we keep our economy moving? And at the same time, people say, going through the same discussion with tree planters and CN, for example, with workers that have come to Valemount to work on the CN project. So we should be clear, there are expectations of those companies that when their workers are in other communities, that there are pandemic protocols in place. And I think that's critical too. As the MLA, I'm not suggesting at all that people have the ability to just come and go as they please in our communities. Of course I'm worried about whether or not our limited medical services are swamped. That's the number one concern when we think about some of our small communities. So it's a balance. We have to try to keep people working. We have to try to keep some semblance of growth in our economy. But I want this person to know that whether it's the mayor, the MP, the MLA, all of us are advocating for stringent protocols to be in place, making sure that isolation, those rules are followed, self-distancing, sanitizing, all of those things, 6 feet apart, all of those things have to be part of a plan. So, I understand the concern, the fear that people feel, but there are protocols that are put in place, they are monitored, and companies and industrial sectors are expected to follow those.
Right. It is a big concern for people, and as you mentioned, both a large group of CN workers, I think 200 recently in Valemount, up to 700 workers coming eventually for the pipeline build. Disturbing news just recently from Dr. Bonnie Henry about the oil sands workers coming back into BC and bringing the COVID with them, kind of thing. So I want to read the last half of this question. It really was more of a comment. It appears we as local taxpayers have not had any say on this important matter that could potentially affect the lives of our residents. So the question to MLA Bond is, why hasn't she stood her ground in preventing the infiltration of hundreds of workers into a small community and defended those residents more effectively? So I think you've answered much of that question, but I did want to get the rest of it out there for you.
Sure. Well, let me be clear. I think anyone who knows me knows how fierce I am about where I live and where I represent. So what we should be clear about is that I have stood the ground related to making sure that there are appropriate protocols in place. I want the constituent to recognize that when it came to CN workers being in Valemount, I called CN, I asked for a briefing, I followed up with exactly what protocols would be in place. And we saw that CN, for example, put in place a plan. Should anything happen with any of the workers, there is an extrication plan. We adjusted schedules, for example, start time were adjusted so that there wasn't a swamping of the local supply chain or local convenience stores. So to suggest that I haven't stood my ground would be inaccurate. I have always been clear that I support responsible resource development, including the project that will work its way through Valemount. Do I believe there need to be stringent protocols in place? Yes, I do. And I convey that to Northern Health regularly, as should this constituent. They are more than welcome to contact Northern Health to express their concerns, to be reassured about the plans that are in place. But I also believe we need to find that balance. We need to find a way to continue to see the economy move forward. Dr. Henry has been clear. She is the person who is managing how projects move in British Columbia, not Shirley Bond MLA. I am not a medical health expert. I have raised issues related to tree planting, to CN, to the pipeline project. My job is to raise the issue and ensure that Dr. Henry and other medical health professionals are putting guidelines in place to keep our communities safe.
Okay, great. Let's move on to some short questions we received from the business community. Some of these we've covered in some other chats we've had, but maybe we can make some headway on it. The question is, there are still a lot of businesses that fall through the cracks for government assistance on the $40,000 interest-free loan, such as small business owners that don't pay themselves from shareholder loan accounts or pay on a contract basis and don't have payroll. And there still has been no assistance to small businesses or any business to pay rent or insurance or utilities. So let's start there, and there's a little tag-on question after that. So. But let's start with that.
Sure, and I think we made progress. We saw the threshold move down to $20,000. We also saw the inclusion of credit unions. Initially, there was a concern that if your primary lending institution wasn't a credit union, you didn't get that opportunity either to use your credit union. So we've made progress. Is there more to do? Absolutely. So those are the kinds of issues that organizations like Small Business BC, like the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, Community Futures, and others. We had a roundtable recently that was hosted by Community Futures and the Community Development Institute from UNBC. What a great place to provide feedback to those of us who were elected to say, still have gaps here. We need to fix some of these issues. So the constituency feedback is absolutely critical so that mayors and MPs and MLAs continue to raise those issues. So those issues are on my radar screen. We've made progress. We've got the threshold low. We got credit unions included. Now we need to continue to look at those who continue to fit in those places where there are gaps. appreciate the feedback. We'll continue to argue on behalf of small businesses like the ones that you're describing to me.
Okay, great. The last part of that question is there any kind of recovery plan for businesses to reopen when the ban is lifted? Now, I'm not sure how privy you are to where those plans stand at this point, but what do you know?
Well, I do know this, that, government is absolutely grappling with that timeline as we speak. And if anyone gets a chance to hear the almost daily briefings by Dr. Henry and Mr. Dix, this is probably the question of the day every day. How do we move from where we are now to the new or different normal that we're going to face? So I think that government is working through those questions as we speak. And, they also are learning from jurisdictions around the world. You'll see that in different places around the world, there are different reactions to how quickly you can move back to a more normally functioning economy. So, long answer to the question, which probably is a short one. Work is underway. I can assure you the government wants to do the transition in a safe, thoughtful, carefully managed way. And I have every confidence that work is being done. People will want it to happen more quickly than it will. That's just our nature. We want to get back to doing things the way we used to do. So I'm going to continue to feed up information about where I think we have opportunities to look at. One of the things I've heard most is the closure of parks. Those are things that impact people's daily lives where they want to be outside. And so, all of those things I feed up as the local representative to government, but I do want to assure people those conversations are underway. Government is considering the next phase. It's just going to be a matter of looking at where we are with the public health issues and how we can move forward safely. They're going to have to find that balance.
Okay, great. So the last question we have from a member of the public is, I would like to know what MLA Bond's thoughts are on how long this is going to last, and if or when we will get back to some sort of normal after this pandemic is gone, and how long will it take for the virus to really be gone? That's a lot of broad questions there for you, and I know you're not a medical expert, but what are your opinions on that?
Well, I think that as we hear, the commentary, not just in British Columbia, but across the country, certainly hear the Prime Minister reference it a lot in his commentary as well. I don't think anyone really knows. And what from the information that we've been provided and from the briefings that, Dr. Henry provides, there may well be, a sense that we can make some sort of adjustments in the months that lie ahead. But she's also been clear that things like social distancing, mass gatherings are not likely to happen anytime soon. I'm sure many of you sat and, it was hard not to feel the impact of a statement like there will be no P&E, there will be no large parades, festivals. And I just started to think about all the things that I love to do in the Robson Valley. And I think about how they are such a part of my life, my family's life after all these years, and they are part of what we plan our summer around. And I have no confidence at this point in time that any of those will go ahead. I think the other thing we need to recognize, and Dr. Henry's clear about this, is there may well be another wave of this in the fall and winter. And until we get a vaccine, no one really has a sense of what the science is going to look like. And so I think as hard as it is for us to, in many ways, relinquish that decision-making to other experts, that's the place to find myself. I have to rely on people who have expertise, who have been through these kinds of medical emergencies before. So, I don't think there's an easy answer to that question. I think that we need to move ahead in a responsible and thoughtful way. Am I going to miss all of those celebrations and doing things the way we normally do? Yes. There will be a new normal. I don't know, I haven't been in the Robson Valley, obviously, since the stay-at-home order was put in place. But But when I go to the drugstore to pick up a prescription for my husband, for example, I wait in line, often outside the store here in Prince George, 6 feet apart. Will that change? I honestly do not know the answer to that question. But I'm also learning, you and I are learning with this experience. We haven't done this before. I'm sure we're going to be doing it again.
Right.
But I'm learning to stay connected to people in different ways. I can tell you this, that many people who know me know that I absolutely adore my grandchildren, and I have 2 grandsons who live near me, out in a rural or more rural part of our region. And I have only seen them. My husband is obviously, because of his heart history and age, can be quite vulnerable. So the only way we've seen our grandsons is either on FaceTime at the end of their driveway, having a conversation from the car with our grandson. It is really hard, and I don't want to underestimate the impact that this is having on people, on their connections, on our businesses, on our celebrations and community. But the future at this point is somewhat unknown. And as I keep reminding myself, that this is what we need to do now. And I'm optimistic that there will be some form of new normal that will allow us to be in community again. I just don't know what that will be.
Yeah, thank you. It's a scary time for everyone, and that unknown quantity is something we just can't get past. That's our human nature. I understand on a personal level that people, in a show of appreciation for what you've been doing and the work you've been doing, have begun to start leaving food and treats on your doorstep at your office. How does that make you feel?
I'm probably going to get emotional as I speak about that. I am very lucky to be surrounded by, incredible people who have touched our hearts so deeply over the last number of weeks. Many people would know that my husband has had some heart health challenges. So we have been so incredibly blessed. And when I think about legacies from the pandemic, I hope that is one of the things that we carry on with at the end of this. I look outside my home and in my neighborhood. I see people walking through the neighborhood. The other day I was out trying to shovel the last of the snow and do a variety of things. One of my neighbors walked over, proper social distancing, but just offered to help me. And it was really, really wonderful. In return, I baked a banana bread loaf and dropped it on his bumper the other day, So I am deeply grateful. I also, though, am acutely aware of the fact that many people are not in those circumstances, that there are a lot of lonely, probably sad, frightened people. And you referenced the whole issue of domestic violence, and we know that there has been an uptick in the number of calls for services and supports. For many families, home isn't a safe place. It's not a refuge like it is for me and my husband. And I worry very deeply about the long-term mental health impacts for families and for seniors and people who are vulnerable. So I hope we'll all do our part. And I really appreciated Dr. Henry's words. You need to stay apart, but stay connected. And so, finding notes on my doorstep, and I think it was just the other day that someone dropped off the entire series of Yes, Minister on our front doorstep. So, maybe that's something Bill and I will have to start watching. But just those little acts of kindness. And I hope that when we are able to reconnect more personally and in person, that we'll hang on to those remembrances of dropping things on people's doorsteps or baking the banana bread to drop at neighbors' house. I think that's one of the positive legacies. But I also want us all to please be acutely aware are supports for mental health services. There are vulnerable seniors in all of our communities. There are persons with disabilities, people who are afraid to be in their homes. There are kids missing their teachers who are missing their kids. You know, let's just go out of our way to stay connected, but stay apart.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I just want to very briefly end with something we talked about earlier, and you talked a little bit about one of the legacies, hopefully the lasting legacies of the pandemic is kindness and you know, looking out for one another. And I remember my parents who were both went through the Depression years and what they learned from the Depression and how they learned about helping people and making sure that everybody had enough to eat and could have a sense of belonging. What do you think, outside of the kindness aspect, will be our legacies from this pandemic?
Well, I think there's lots of lessons for us to learn. I mean, I think that one of the things I personally learned as a longtime cabinet minister and an elected official, that this can really bring out the best in people, and it can also bring out the worst in people. And I think that, you know, our job as elected officials at times like this are to find ways to be constructive in our commentary, to be collaborative where possible, and to concentrate on the issue at hand. Like, we're talking about a public health emergency here, so we need to make that our number one focus. You know, I also hope that, and I can tell you that on the calls I convene every week with elected officials along the corridors that I represent, I've got to know them better. I appreciate the passion with which they serve their communities. And even though I've known them well for a long time, I have a better sense of understanding of the issues. I hope that will continue, that we're making concentrated, specific efforts to learn about the issues on a regular basis, work together to raise those issues, and be collaborative to a level that's increased from what it has been. And I've always worked constructively with my elected officials. That makes a difference for me every week. Getting to know them, getting to know our riding even better. And I think the care that we need to ensure, you know, when you think about one of the issues that all of us are so touched by, you know, our vulnerable seniors in long-term care, for example, have been, you know, they've been the epicenter at this point of the virus. So we need to think about how we care for seniors. We need to think about how they can be cared for close to home. I think that's a legacy that we all need to look at. But I'm encouraged by the positivity that we see. Musicians who are sharing online, concerts that are taking place. We're going to have to do something virtually for a while. When you think about it, the federal government has said Canada Day is going to be done virtually. I don't know what that looks like, but you know, those are things that there are positive things that we can take from this. But I'm like you. I look forward to the day where we can celebrate in person with one another, that we can reconnect, face to face. Other than the use of Skype and other technology platforms. But until that day, we need to be diligent. We need to, I'll tell you one thing that's going to be a legacy, and that will be hand washing. I don't know about you, but you know, certainly in my household, we have taken that to a whole new level. And again, I think those are the practical things that will stay in place. I want to thank my constituents. I want to thank for the tough questions, for the feedback, for the reminder of things that yet need to be dealt with. Those matter to me, and I commit to working hard to find the answers and supporting my constituents. But I also thank them for their kindness to me, to my husband and our family. It means the world to me.
Well, thank you very much, Shirley, for joining us today and for answering all these questions. It's a strange thing to do this on Skype, I have to admit, but we managed. We got it done. Hope you and your family stay well and take care, and we'll see you when we can see you in person. That's right, and I wish you the very same. I thank you for your excellent
the work that Valemount TV does, that you do. I wish you good health, and I want to wish that to my constituents as well. And as I say now, in all of my emails, stay well and take good care of yourself. So thank you for the time this afternoon. I very much appreciate it.
Great. Thanks very much.